The framework of analysis that I bring to this thing is thinking about four distinct sets of issues. I mean, I'm not a particularly committed social scientist, but if one was going to call these variables, I would say that obviously domestic violence is the issue, women's rights, I mean, the right or not, the lack of a right to sort of be protected from domestic violence, and particularly in this case, angling in how, if at all, religion, and in this context, in Muslim societies, Shari'a bears upon these issues, and finally, the issue of the state. And I would say that, I mean, my punchline, which I will give to you right away, is that the state is the most important issue of all. I mean, how in different countries, in different contexts, social and political relations and the governance of religion are all in some ways arbitrated through the state, which may include very much the failures of states. And I will elaborate on different ways of thinking about that. But one thing I often tell my students is whatever the question, the answer is always the state. And so one thing I would just say that, you know, to appreciate the fact that domestic violence rates vary, but it is a problem everywhere in the world. In fact, there are only 4 countries in the world where domestic violence is considered very unusual. And so we're thinking then one of the particular angles of or issues for perhaps feminist scholars, feminist anthropologists, is when we're thinking about domestic violence and Sharia, to be able to apprehend the distinctions that may bear upon the problem in Muslim societies, but not, I mean, to be able to consciously avoid and criticize the kind of orientalizing notions that somehow Muslims are uniquely disadvantaged. In fact, you know, in context, everyone who's subjected to domestic violence is disadvantaged. And the question is how? How does that occur? And so to a large extent, in this confluence of dynamics, I mean, women's rights everywhere are shaped by laws. I mean, they're the laws that do or do not protect them, to the extent that women are, all people, we are constructed through laws. We are products of the law. Our rights, our relationships, our opportunities, et cetera, are very much filtered through law. And so the question of how laws operate, both religious laws and other kinds of laws in different contexts. But then the issue of the state itself, the point being, and I will elaborate on this, is that why states are so important. I mean, in the modern world, like, states vary, and social and relationships between states and societies, or the law-state society complex, can vary. But in the modern world, all states have the capacity and authority to regulate violence. I mean, whether or not they do so, that is a commonality of states, and states are capable of perpetrating violence, and states are responsible whether they live up to or prevent different kinds of violence, and that's the centrality of the state. Now, domestic violence itself, just to understand what it is, and distinguished from other forms of violence, and including other forms of gender violence. I mean, it's violence that occurs specifically within the so-called private sphere, basically between individuals who are related through intimacy, blood, or law. In that sense. So the distinction between male on female violence within the home is different than, for example, a woman being raped, you know, by a stranger on the streets. And so the issue of the intimacy becomes a crucial element. And while it is, of course, true that men and boys can be subjected to domestic violence, overwhelmingly, women and girls are the victims of this kind of private sphere violence.